Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. The political news on Tuesday night was the entry into the 2024 Senate race of Kari Lake, who lost the gubernatorial race in 2022 by a narrow margin. This is a piece of what Lake said at her campaign launch.
We've got 1 year to save this country. And we got to go in a different direction, people. We got to go away from Joe Biden. It's not working out. It's not working out. And I will tell you what, I will stop the push toward communism, and I will be the most pro-America senator in the entire country.
Okay, one thing notable here, at least to my eye from Kari Lake, is her apparent turn, her pivot away from Stop the Steal. That is part of what she made her brand in 2022. There was a Trump quote at the time that I thought was quite interesting. He said, "If they say, 'How is your family?' she says the election was rigged and stolen." So that is how much 2020 fraud claims were part of her persona when she ran for governor. And I didn't watch the whole of her announcement speech, but a Politico write-up says that it had only one passing reference to election fraud. And here's what it was, quote, "Fighting for honest elections is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's an American issue," unquote. Kate, to my eye, I don't know if she can maintain that. If she is asked, do you still believe that the 2020 election was stolen, as she surely will be on the campaign trail as we get through 2024. I don't know what her message discipline on that will be, but I do think that it is remarkable, her pivot here, given that, at least to my eye, these kinds of claims were part of what were responsible for her loss. And just to review some of the data, her loss was 49.6% to 50.4%. And the very same night, Republicans had success all over Arizona, including State Treasurer Kimberly Yee, who won a 56-44 reelection. You can go back into the vote totals in specific counties and specific precincts and find that Kimberly Yee outperformed Kari Lake in a lot of very traditionally Republican areas, or even just the exit polls. Kari Lake lost independents by 7 points, moderates by 20 points, and 9% of self-identified Republicans. So this is a very hard Senate race to handicap because we have a three-way battle here. Kyrsten Sinema is still the incumbent senator, and now Kari Lake. I don't know whether Republicans will now rally to her in the way that some of them at least didn't in 2022 or not. But it strikes me as a very unpredictable political environment as we go towards this election.
So the three-way race does add some wrinkles here that make it hard to say who will really benefit. To your point, noticed the same thing. A lot of discussion about the border, about inflation. She mentioned Ronald Reagan as a political outsider, though I might note that Ronald Reagan didn't practice 1 minute until midnight scorched earth politics. And I guess to that point, I think it'll simply be hard to put the Stop the Steal persona back in the box. To your point, she'll be constantly asked about whether she still thinks the 2020 election was stolen. It will be hard to persuade some of those voters who rejected her the first time as governor to come back. It just does not look promising. And I think what we should think about is the broader 2024 Senate context. This should be a decent map for Republicans. By my count, Democrats have to defend more than 20 seats and Republicans only 11. So it should be favorable to them. But the reason that it's not looking so favorable is because of places like Arizona, places like Montana, where Republicans have recruited a great candidate named Tim Sheehy, who looks very promising. He's a Navy SEAL, started his own firefighting company. I guess he just looks like he's straight out of central political casting. But he looks like he might lose a primary to Matt Rosendale, who John Tester, the Democratic incumbent, already beat once. And so you have these races that should be winnable, but you have contests like Kari Lake here, and potentially another same dynamic playing out in Montana. So that is what the real question for 2024 is, and something to think about. The Ohio Republican primary is not as firm yet. But, Mitch McConnell has been lecturing for years that candidate quality matters for Republicans. And hopefully at some point soon, they absorb that lesson.
That is pretty much my assessment too. If you look at the ratings from the Cook Political Report, there are 8 seats that are either leaning in one direction or toss-ups, meaning they're not solid Republican or solid Democrat. They're not likely Republican or likely Democrat. These are the most competitive. And those 8 are Arizona, Ohio, West Virginia, which are in the toss-up column. And then 5 that lean Democratic: Michigan, Montana, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. None of these competitive seats are rated as lean Republican, at least right now. And some of this has to do with the broader political environment, as it always does. But you'd think that that would be a tailwind for Republicans in 2024. You have the incumbent president is a Democrat. And so candidates can make the argument that we need a Republican Senate in order to check President Biden. By the way, President Biden's approval numbers remain pretty low. I think Republicans are going to have good issues in 2024 running on inflation and running on gas prices, potentially running on President Biden's weakness in foreign policy. And yet the other X factor is who is going to be at the top of the Republican ticket. At this point, it looks like it might be President Trump. And then, of course, the Republican Party also has a long history of choosing candidates that are very popular among primary electorates, but less popular in the general election. And I don't know whether Republicans have learned that lesson yet. It seems in some places, maybe Doug Mastriano, the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, who was a drag on the ticket last time, he has decided he is not going to run in 2024. And yet the counterexample might be Kari Lake, who could have ceded this race to a fresh face, allowed the state Republican Party to turn the page on the Stop the Steal stuff. And she seems unwilling to do that. So I don't know if we will get a Republican primary in Arizona, a real fight, someone else trying to become the nominee instead of Kari Lake. But as you say, Kate, we may get that in Montana. And who are Republicans going to nominate in some of these other places, Ohio and West Virginia? There's a long history of Republicans throwing away seats on candidates who don't have their mind on what the general electorate wants to hear.
Right. I mean, that's the dynamic we're seeing in Arizona. I mean, Kari Lake her poll numbers look like she's really got 40 or a decent share of the primary electorate locked up. Blake Masters, who also lost statewide race for a Senate seat, was thinking about getting in, but he appears to be, in the latest polls I've seen, polling in the single digits. And there's some reporting that maybe Trump convinced him to stay out, but he brings the same baggage and problems, similar baggage at least, that Kari Lake does. And it's really a pity because, to your point, a strong GOP candidate in a general election could really exploit this division between Sinema, who's an independent, and her Democratic challenger. So this is shaping up to look like another unforced error. Maybe Kari Lake is heading for a real pivot here and will abandon the Stop the Steal rhetoric that has, I think, cost her so much support, but I'm certainly not counting on it. I do think at least somebody has told her that the things that Republican voters are really focused on and animated on are things like inflation, the border, failures abroad that are mounting all the time. I do think that those are the themes that successful candidates have been hitting for Republicans. But again, it should be a decent year for Republicans if you've got a president who's polling in the 40s. But it looks by all accounts like they may throw that advantage away again. And there's real stuff at stake in who controls the Senate. Okay, so if, say, Biden wins again, a Republican check on the Senate, it matters for how much the federal government's going to spend, whether we, for instance, spend more on our defense, which is starting to look really important as the world grows more dangerous. It controls the quality of nominees by Senate consent and who the president can get through the Senate. So there are real things at stake here down ballot. And so hopefully we start to see some more promising signs out of these states where it's going to come down to.
Thank you, Kate and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.